In this episode, I received a question from a nail professional in Canada who asked me this: Doug, why are there harmful toxic substances in cosmetics, and why don't manufacturers just take them out? This is a very interesting question, so I've decided to dedicate the entire episode to answering this one question. One reason this is an interesting question is because this is a great example of what's called a loaded question. What's a loaded question? That's a question that contains unjustified or inaccurate assumptions. This question contains several unjustified and inaccurate assumptions. Can you spot them? Here's the question again. Why are there harmful toxic substances in cosmetics, and why don't manufacturers just take them out? The unjustified assumptions are these. First, that there are toxic substances in cosmetics, and presumably at harmful levels. And second, that manufacturers could simply remove these toxic substances, but they don't. Now, I suspect this person did not intend to ask a loaded question. She's likely just repeating a question that she's heard raised by what I call fear-based advocacy groups. They're groups that specialize in tricking the public using fear. Loaded questions are a favorite trick that they often use to deceive the public. Loaded questions may seem simple, but they rarely have an easy answer. This is done on purpose, so that the person who's answering will look foolish, or like they're hiding something, or that they're just in denial of the so-called facts. Well, let's start with the facts. What are they? The facts are cosmetic products are safe. Not only that, they are among the safest products that consumers can buy. Now, I've heard both Health Canada and the US FDA make this statement, and I agree with them. Why is it an unjustified assumption to say that cosmetics contain harmful amounts of toxic substances? This assumes that if a potentially toxic substance is present, that it must be dangerous. But that is not true. And instead, this is a huge deception. Salt, for instance. Salt is potentially toxic. It can kill. But when small amounts are consumed, it's beneficial and necessary for life. So the notion that a toxic substance must always be dangerous is clearly an unjustified assumption. This is very important to understand because most of the claims made by anti-cosmetic groups are based on this one incorrect assumption. I'll use the four most widely named so-called toxic substances that are found in cosmetics to demonstrate what I mean. These four substances are routinely used to trick the public into thinking cosmetics are dangerous. They are formaldehyde, 1,4-dioxane, parabens, and lead. Tiny traces of each of these can be found in some cosmetics, usually at levels below 10 parts per million, which is equal to 1,000th of a percent. Pretty small. Many of the false claims made by anti-cosmetic groups are based on these exceedingly low amounts that are not harmful. I've pointed this out to these groups on many occasions, but their response is always the same. They incorrectly claim that there is no safe limit for these substances and all of it should be removed. Really? Well, then why are apples, apricots, carrots, potatoes, watermelons, mushrooms, plums, cucumbers, spinach, grapes, why are these considered safe? All of these contain about the same amount of formaldehyde. Shiitake mushrooms can contain 40 times more than most cosmetics would ever contain, which is still a very small amount, 40,000ths of a percent. And yes, this is true even when these are grown organically. Formaldehyde will still be present naturally because formaldehyde is natural and organic. It exists normally in our breath and in our blood. Our bodies use formaldehyde as a building block to make other substances such as proteins. Now, why are low levels found in plants and cosmetics? Because both cosmetics and plants rely on these trace levels of formaldehyde to act as preservatives. And preservatives make cosmetic products safer, not more hazardous. Now, what about 1,4-dioxane? These groups love to scare people with this substance because they know many will confuse it with dioxin or Agent Orange, which is never found in cosmetics. Dioxin and dioxane may have similar sounding names, but they are completely different substances. But the names are close enough to scare people, and close enough will work when all you want to do is create irrational fear. These groups know that the average person doesn't know much about chemical names, so that makes it easy to deceive people. Here are the facts. 1,4-dioxane can be found in some nail, skin, and hair products and body cleansers in tiny trace levels. Why? Because trace levels are created as a byproduct when making certain types of cleansing ingredients. This happens when manufacturers use a process called ethoxylation. Why do manufacturers use ethoxylation? Well, not to make cheaper ingredients. That's just another deception spread by these fear-based groups. This process actually makes cleansing agents that are more expensive. These cleansing agents are much more gentle, and they're less irritating or less damaging to the skin. Ethoxylation makes mild cleansers for sensitive skin, or for use in baby products, which must have a low potential for skin irritation. Some advocacy groups twist the facts and claim that there are toxic substances in baby shampoos and washes, etc., which is silly, especially when the facts are fairly considered. By the way, 1,4-dioxane is also naturally occurring. It's also an organic substance, which these groups will never mention. I wonder why. Could it be that they don't want people to know the real truth? Many plants create 1,4-dioxane. They do this to control the ripening of their fruits. That's why this substance is found in bananas, pineapples, and tomatoes, just to name a few. Now, I've tested USDA organically grown pineapples and tomatoes that I purchased from a large and well-known chain of health food stores. I found 1,4-dioxane in both of these. Of course, it would be surprising if I didn't have found them in these foods. So clearly, there are safe levels of this substance, and we should not be concerned about traces. What about parabens? In episode 12, I discussed how fear-based activist groups needlessly frighten the public, claiming that parabens cause breast cancer. Interestingly, this claim was based on surprisingly weak evidence. Just one poorly performed and very small scientific study started this whole absurd controversy. That study has been completely discredited by other researchers who performed follow-up studies. It's now been determined that these original claims were bogus nonsense. It is wrong to say that commonly used parabens, which are commonly used in cosmetics, are harmful. These are among the safest preservatives for cosmetics, and it's a downright shame that deceivers have tricked the public into thinking that they are harmful, when in fact parabens increase the safety of cosmetics by controlling the growth of bacteria and fungi. They're better at doing this than any other cosmetic preservative. Parabens are also much less likely to cause skin sensitivity when compared to other preservatives. It's important to note this: no country on earth has banned the use of parabens. Why? Because they are considered safe as used in cosmetics. This shows the dangerous power that some of these advocacy groups have to widely spread misinformation and intentionally mislead people. Now, not all advocacy groups do this, just the ones that are base their practices on fear and frightening people. However, there are organizations that focus on fact-based information. One example is the well-known breast cancer nonprofit organization, the Susan G. Komen Foundation. Recently, they stated that parabens, quote, do not appear to build up in the tissue from cosmetic use, and they have not been found to cause cancer in animals. And parabens are not considered a health risk at this time. End quote. Parabens also naturally occur in blueberries, strawberries, black currants, peaches, carrots, onions, cocoa beans, grapes, and many other plant sources, even when they are organically grown, which makes parabens natural and organic. Finally, what about lead? Lead is also a naturally occurring substance that's found in water, air, and soil, usually at levels that are well below where they could cause health concerns. In other words, traces of lead can be found everywhere at levels that are considered safe, so lead would be pretty hard to completely avoid. Lead is only a problem when concentrated into much higher amounts than would ever be found in cosmetics. Yet for many years, advocacy groups have falsely claimed that cosmetics contain dangerous amounts of lead. Lipstick has been the favorite target for these false claims, and every few years this myth gets recirculated. This is a hoax that won't die because these anti-cosmetic groups keep it alive. Why? Solely so they can needlessly frighten the public. Lead can be found at about 0.001% or less in cosmetics, and the US FDA has said there is no reason for concern, since they agree these levels in cosmetics are completely safe. Health Canada looked at this same issue and calculated that a person would have to eat 5 tubes of lipstick each day to exceed the safe levels for lead ingestion. Yet these groups continue to claim that lipstick is toxic, despite the fact that the US FDA and Health Canada completely disagree with them. Why do they do this? These fear-mongering groups don't care what anyone says. Their minds are closed on the subject. They think they're right and everyone else is wrong. One reason is because these groups don't use real science. They use junk science. Junk science is phony science. It's a misuse of science to support things that are untrue. In my view, using science to deceive people is a terrible offense. Science is a way to understand the facts, and it should not be used to fool the public. A famous American humorist named Mark Twain once said this: "There are 3 kinds of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics." These fear-based advocacy groups use all 3. They get donations from the public, and they use that money to sponsor bogus studies so they can pretend to have scientific information supporting them. Then they use this information to create phony statistics that support their misguided causes. But this is nothing more than a game of charades designed to fool the public, news media, and politicians, while these groups rake in millions in donations. That's why for years I've asked people not to listen to fear-based activist groups and never donate money to them, and don't use their websites. They'll just take some of the donated money to unfairly attack cosmetics and continue to needlessly frighten the public with junk science and more trickery. It's not fair, and it harms the entire cosmetic and beauty industry. So please tell your friends not to listen to these fearmongers and never donate money to them. They're up to no good. For instance, last year, several well-known health and environmental groups launched a campaign across Canada, insisting that manufacturers phase out potentially toxic products. But even vitamins, water, and salt are potentially toxic in high enough concentrations. Most plant extracts contain potentially toxic substances, but in very low concentrations. Tea tree and lavender oil are examples, and many other natural extracts could not be used if these groups got their way. In every instance discussed today, the concentrations were so low that the presence of these substances was not a concern. So clearly, removal of these substances is not needed to make cosmetics safe. They're already safe. I want to quote a well-known Canadian scientist, Dr. Joe Schwartz, who says this about the toxicity of certain substances in cosmetics. Quote, "Toxicity depends on its concentration in the product and the route of exposure, not simply on its presence." Close quote. In other words, if the concentration is low enough, there is no toxicity. And if the substance is toxic by ingestion only, then it's not harmful to put it on the skin. That's what's meant by the route of exposure. For example, rubbing salt on your skin is safe, even if you've been told to keep salt out of your diet. Dr. Schwartz is another chemist that's speaking out about this scientific trickery created by these deceptive groups. He's a chemistry professor and director of the McGill University Office for Science and Society in Montreal. He also hosts a show called The Dr. Joe Show on Montreal television channel CJAD. Dr. Joe wrote a very, very informative article on this subject. And because he's such a wonderful source of really good information on fact-based information, I want to share a link to this article at the end of the episode so you can check out Dr. Schwartz and see other things that he's said. I hope you'll take the moment to read what he's written, the short article, because it's well worth the time. And don't forget, share what you learn with others so they can escape from this web of irrational fear and deception created by these anti-cosmetic advocacy groups.